And so there is no question of things being controlled and moved and pushed by other things as billiard balls are, or billiard balls appear to be from a certain superficial point of view. We've just got this huge being, although being is not quite the right word, because existence is composed of being and non-being, corresponding to solid and space, crest and trough of wave. And because fundamentally the energy of the world is vibratory. It's on and off. And there is no off without on, no on without off. To be or not to be is not the question. Because to be implies not to be as much as not to be implies to be. So in the Taoist Chinese philosophy, it is said that being and non-being arise mutually. It's like the egg and the hen. You don't find eggs without hens, nor do you find hens without eggs. A hen is, as a matter of fact, one egg's way of becoming other eggs. It all goes together. But we don't see this for the simple reason that we are primarily involved in using a method of perception which is analytic, which spotlights various features of the world and does so with the aid of naming or giving symbols to those features of the world which we consider significant, and therefore ignoring features of the world which we don't consider insignificant, and for which therefore we don't have names. Haven't you noticed how often children point at something and say, "What is that?" And you can't make out exactly what it is they're pointing at. They're pointing out something they've noticed, but which adults don't consider important. And they want a name for it. We don't have a special word for dry space. We don't have a special word for the inside surface of a tube. But in American Indian languages have such words. Eskimos recognize 5 different kinds of snow. But the Aztec language has one word for snow, rain, hail, and ice. You can see the geographical reason for that. So according to what you consider important, you have names. And according to naming, you identify separate things. But they're only separate in a purely theoretical way. They're not materially separate, not physically separate. And so, it's immensely important that we become aware of this fact. Because if we're not aware of it, we do the most stupid things. We try to solve problems by altering what are only the symptoms of the problem. We try, for example, unilaterally to abolish mosquitoes, forgetting that mosquitoes go with a certain kind of environment and play a very important part in it, not to mention other insects which are killed when we kill the mosquitoes. And so, in this way, we are doing things without recognizing that they're going to have unpredictable results in unexpected places. Same way, if you put certain drugs or certain operations in the human organism, you've got to be very careful what you're doing, and you have to study the organism very carefully in order to know what consequences this will have. If you farm in a certain way, without due respect for the ecology of the whole area in which you're working, you can get the most appalling results. And characteristically, our technological civilization
I think this is the wrong
is much
pencil.
too heedless of these ecological connections.
Ah, it's because I loaded a 2H. I meant to load a 2B.
Therefore, in order to overcome our characteristic sense of hostility to the external world, and to stop conquering nature with the bulldozers or conquering space with rockets, we have to realize that the external universe is just as much ourself as our own body. That we have, each one of us, an inside and an outside. And if the inside of your skin is your inside, what is outside your skin is your outside. And the two are inseparable. They're polar. Because you can't have an inside without an outside, or an outside without an inside, except you construct something like a Klein bottle, which is a sort of freak. Maybe the universe has such as a Klein bottle. Who knows? However, the second point I was making, which arises directly from this, and this was the burden of the second session, was that this ignorance or ignorance of the inseparability of all different things goes hand in hand with a bad relationship or an inadequate relationship to the material present. I was showing that the material present is the only time there is. Other times, past times, future times, are abstractions. There never is anything but the present.
Max out the cake. Hey, what's up?
Think of the present as a split second. That's an abstract view of the present. You tend to think of the present as a split second because you're used to looking at a watch. And the watch is marked out with hairlines, and the idea of watchmakers is to make those lines as thin as possible, consistent with visibility. And therefore, as the hand sweeps across the hairline, you've hardly time to say now. And we begin to think that the present is that. Well, of course it isn't. Present time is rather like the field of vision, where you've got, as it were, a fairly clear center. The field of vision is an oval. You can run your fingers around it, just at the point where they start to become invisible. And you realize that the edge of the field is fuzzy.
Hi, Jasmo.
And so in the same way, we have a vision
I think you know what I'm working on right now.
As having fuzzy edges. Just as when you are listening to music, you don't hear music a single note at a time. You hear it in phrases.
I guess you can't really see.
You anticipate what's coming.
What this is.
You
It's
remember
not drawing it
what
big enough.
has been played.
But I'm like
so
doing
you have
some
a kind of wide but fuzzy
concept
edge
repaneling
view
for
of
your
what is called
comic.
the present. But it's what there's always there, see? And if in a culture we are brought up not to see this, we start living for the future. And we live for the future mainly because our present is inadequate.
Dang.
And it's inadequate.
Oh my
because
gosh,
we
can't
are not
see
seeing
it?
it
Oh, this is
We are seeing
a
it in terms of abstraction.
comic repaneling for Jasmine.
And if your present is inadequate,
So yeah,
and
like
is,
a
matter of fact, only an
collab
abstract
reworking
version
of
life,
her. I didn't realize how loud my
you're
stuff
like
was.
a person with a non-nutritive diet.
Yeah, so Jasmine
You always therefore feel
has this
hungry.
comic called Stolen,
And you
and
eat
I'm
because you want
doing
more.
some reworking on the panels for it.
So in the same way,
So I'm
more
just getting a
lively,
feel
more
for
kindly, more,
the
more,
design
more,
of the
more, because
original.
sometime or other, it's got to be all right. The thing I've been looking for must happen, I hope. But of course it never does. Not if you live that way.
Here, I'll drop you the link
Because
of the
when
first
all your goals
page.
in life are attained,
Pasta.
and you are at the top of your profession, or you've got a beautiful children, or you
No,
whatever it
it's
was you wanted,
probably like my
you feel the same as you
scale.
always felt. You're still looking for something in the future.
Let's see here.
And there isn't any future.
Thank you.
Not really.
Let me see if I can
Therefore,
do
I
some
often say that
zoomy
only
type
people
stuff.
who live in a proper relationship to the material present have any use for making any plans at all. Because then the plans work out, then they're capable of enjoying them. The other people aren't. So
I guess I could do. Thank you.
people then who aren't
I
here
guess instead I
fully,
could do 4 to a
whose
page,
minds are off somewhere else,
so that I could see,
are
so that people
always
can see. But yeah,
starved.
this is better. Okay, cool. Yeah, and then I'll do the next
Always
one's a little bigger.
And there's nowhere to go except here.
So those will essentially be remaining the same. These are the ones that I'm gonna tweak a little bit.
Because of the fact that the word material is a very much misunderstood word.
And we're listening to the joyous sounds of the philosopher Alan Watts, and some chill step underneath him, because I need to focus on 3 things at once apparently.
As generally used, we say the body, the earth, the rocks, the trees, the animals, and all that are materials. And we set over against that the spiritual, or the mental, as if that were some kind of vaguely gaseous world permeating the material world. Or perhaps not gaseous, but rather abstract. The world of ideas, the world of principles. But it's so curious that when people do that, they debase both the material and the spiritual domains of life. Because these domains of life have vitality only when they're together. When you see the material as the spiritual, and the spiritual as the material. And then both of these concepts tend to vanish. Because what we call the material world in this put-down sense of the word material is only a concept. If you want to conceive the world as material, then that means really people who do conceive it as material in that sense of the word material haven't got a good relationship to it. But if you have an immediate relationship, if you really are aware of the present, then your vision of the material world is transformed. And you see that it isn't material, it isn't spiritual, it's indefinable.
Kind of book
It's
should
what
it be?
there is.
Cricket, maybe?
And
Or a ladybug?
there is no way of saying what that is, because you can't put it into a particular category.
Ladybug?
You
Grasshopper?
can only define what you can classify. Now I know
Yeah, we
that
can do
is
a
perhaps
grasshopper.
a little bit of a difficult idea to master because of our confusions of language. We could, if I might try put it in one more way, I would say probably that the correct use of the word material is to mean something like meters, measured.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
When we say something
This is
immaterial,
Jasmine's concept.
we can mean both that it doesn't matter.
So I guess this would
that
be
is
a
to say it
revision
doesn't
of a
measure
comic.
up to anything,
So
it
I
doesn't
guess that's accurate. Yeah.
or that it's spiritual.
Jazz is actually having problems streaming to
material.
Watch Me Work right now.
Immaterial.
If you wanted to check in on
So
her.
I would say the correct use of the word material is the world as measured. The world as represented in pounds, miles, decibels, photons, or whatever. And that, of course, is abstract. Because when you measure the world,
So
you
yes,
don't really
sorry,
make a
short
difference.
answer is yes, it's pretty accurate.
just as the equator
Yeah,
does not cut the world.
'cause she streams at 10 exactly every day. Very punctual lady, Jazz.
So what is the world that is existing upon which our measures are imposed? What is it that underlies the network? The network of measurements, of classification, of quantification. Well, you can't say. You can point to it. But you can't really say what it is. It's not a what. But that is what's here. I mean, that's the world we're actually living in. See? What Korzybski called the unspeakable world.
No problem.
And so when I said the material present, I was using the word material in an incorrect sense. Not the measured present, but the physical present of actual non-verbal being. And people, therefore, who do not relate well to this become incompetent in the practical arts of life. They become bad cooks, bad lovers, bad architects, bad potters, bad clothiers, because they really have no love for anything except abstraction. Money, quantities, status, symbols. And people become absolutely bamboozled by symbols. And so want the symbol rather than what is signified by the symbol. But you see, however, if you want what is signified by the symbol, then you've got the universe by the tail, because everything that is symbolized by a symbol is inseparable from the whole universe. When you, in other words, you catch a fish, it's not just a thing called a fish you've got. You are being fed by all oceans when you catch a fish. You are being sustained by this colossal life, and everything, of course, that goes with the ocean. It's as if the ocean reached out and fed you. And that's why the real reason for giving thanksgiving at meals, that, of course, in the West, people thank God, but it's a more concrete expression to thank the fish. But then, of course, you're thanking the ocean, and so on. So this attitude now of a new vision of nature, not as something chopped up into bits, so that we could look upon the universe as an assemblage of things, as if somehow or other there's all this collection of galaxies and stuff floating around. Where would they come from? Oh, they've sort of been washed up like flotsam and jetsam and have come together by some sort of gravity. And here they are spinning around, as if it was a collection in the sense of something gathered that formerly hadn't been gathered. Of course, astronomically, this isn't taken seriously. People think rather that it all blew up, that all the galaxies expanded from the center and are still going. It's far more likely.
Ding.
Maybe they'll come back
Okie
together
dokie.
again,
Have fun checking in
and then blow up once more.
and stuff like that. I know you're gonna be making rounds and
Maybe
things.
they'll all fade out. But then things will be where they were before it all started. And what happened once can always happen again. Pulsation, you see, is the very nature of life. Big pulses and tiny pulses. Pulses within pulses, forever and ever. So, this point of view is one which has flourished in the Far East, where the relationship of man to the physical world has been very different from our idea. And this raises some curious problems, because the great civilizations of the Far East, particularly the Chinese and the Japanese, did not, until coming into contact with Europe and the United States, did not evolve a technology. Because they didn't evolve the technology, they had all kinds of problems for which we say that made them backward. They had problems of disease and famine and poverty. And we say, well, the poor benighted Chinese, we have nothing to learn from them, because their civilization didn't do the things we've done. But what we don't realize so readily is that this technology which we've produced is very recent. was only in the middle of the 19th century that we really got going. And note that before that date, we permitted as perfectly ordinary procedures judicial torture, slavery, child labor, filth of unspeakable proportions, and plagues, and all that sort of thing was just the way it was anywhere else in the world, in Europe. But we've forgotten, we have short memories. We could sing in church, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all. The rich man in his castle, the poor man in his gate. He made them high and low, ordered their estate. Now that verse is today eliminated from the hymn. Because it's saying, you see, that the stations of life, fortune and misfortune, riches and poverty, are God-given. And since nothing can be done about it. And people tend to accept states of affairs about which nothing can be done. And nothing could be done about it until the Industrial Revolution. And then, of course, the minute that starts, everybody wants it. The Chinese want it, the Indians want it, the Japanese want it, and so on. But the Chinese, for some reason or other, you see, did not develop technology. Now, why didn't they? Why did we? There isn't any simple answer to that question. But one thing that we should note, there are various geographical reasons. And this is not the only reason. But when you look at the map of Europe, you will notice that it's very wiggly. It's full of inlets, harbors, and all like this. See? China, by contrast, is a great solid landmass. So is India. The Europeans were preeminently sailors. And it is highly possible, to begin with, that all the great early technical discoveries were the work of seafaring. This is one of Buckmin's de Fuller's theories. That in quite ancient times, there were rather independent seagoing people who had their own culture, who knew that the world was round, who had great navigators. And from them we learn such things as the hoist, trains, that the first real houses were overturned boats, and that trade and the cross-fertilization of different civilizations and different cultures was a work of sea travel, with the machinery necessary for sea travel. You're not depending on a horse, you're depending upon something a human being has made, and upon a very high form of technology, because sailing is a direct exemplification of man and nature in cooperation. Rowing is different. Rowing is a rather unintelligent way of propelling a boat, because it requires a great deal of effort. But sailing is so skillful because you are simply using the energy of nature to move the boat. You are flowing through nature effortlessly by using the forces around you in a clever way. When you want to go against the wind, you tap. You get the wind to blow you into it. And this is what is called in Chinese Wu Wei, meaning literally non-interference or non-aggression, sometimes translated non-action, but that isn't quite correct. Wu Wei is acting in accordance with the field of forces in which you find yourself. Therefore, in splitting wood, you split with the grain, because that is the way the course of things, the Tao, is arranged. So any skillful person will therefore always inquire, what is the nature of the field of forces in which I find myself? The Chinese would ask, what is its li? And the word li means, what is the organic pattern of this situation? And then act in accordance with it. Don't ever force it. Suppose then you are sawing. You will find that if you push the saw, you will make a jagged cut. And you will get impatient. When any people saw wood impatiently, they always make a mess. But the saw has its own weight. And if you get the sensation that the saw is doing the work, see? It's not quite true, your muscles are involved, but you get the sensation of the saw doing the work, then you will make a good cut. See that the saw is sharp, and let it do the job for you. You will find in all crafts that the same kind of thing happens. When anybody develops consummate skill, when you sing well, you get the sensation that the song is singing itself. When you drive well, somehow the car and the road are carrying you along, but in a very skillful way. This is this thing I was remarking on at first, this new feeling of a relationship with the world. And what you're doing when you do anything skillfully, you are expressing the total power of the field of forces, which is expressing itself in the form of skillful action through the agency of you as a human organism. But it requires intelligence to do this. Now, what is intelligence? Well, I'm going to reserve that question. I just want to go back a bit to the Chinese. Why didn't they evolve technology? Well, they knew an awful lot of things. Joseph Needham is writing a 7-volume history of science and civilization in China, telling us all about their mathematics, their astronomy, their physics, their husbandry ideas, everything in the way of the techniques that the Chinese evolved. But there were two reasons why they didn't go on to technology as we have it. One of them, a bad reason, I think, and the other a good reason. Confucian thought is not interested in nature. It is humanistic, interested in human relations, but very scholastic.
What's a parasol, not a hat?
In other words, the great Confucian classics exercised a rigidifying effect upon Chinese culture, even though they were a great principle of order, social order. But just in the same way as when you get any scripture, the Bible, the Quran, Science and Health would teach the scripture, anything like that, and people set that up, that's the authority. Then you're stuck. And then you get the situation of the astronomers who said, the theologians who said to Galileo, we won't look for the universe, because it already says in the book how the universe is working, and the book can't be wrong.
Yeah, I think that's it. 1, 2, 3, 4, cover. 1, 2, 3,
and
4.
And it's happening today.
Cover, yeah.
When somebody advances an absolutely outrageous proposition for science, lots of scientists are so blind they say, well, it's impossible. It couldn't be.
I don't think that this cover needs a redrawing. It's pretty good. Just needs a little texture.
They are rigidly defending a conception of the universe which requires that everything be as dull as possible. That the universe be absolutely boring and stupid above all. And therefore anything that reveals something that science can't account for, some events, or all events that science can't account for, are simply ignored. And Charles Fort was a man who devoted his life to collecting records of events in the current years, for which there is no reasonable scientific explanation as yet. And the trouble is, all these events are rather unusual, because science only studies the usual. And you have to have an event happen several times in order to study it scientifically. Say, well, it happened and we all saw it. And then the scientist comes in, it's like, when you get sick and you call in the doctor and all the symptoms vanish. And so, your car goes wrong and you take it to the mechanic and nobody can make that funny noise it was making and so on. So, in the same way, scientist comes around and says, well, you say you saw this thing happen. Well, I'll observe it, but it won't happen. So this is the problem, you see. The Confucians got too hung up on books. That is to say, on a theoretical system, in just the same way that we are hung up on our abstract concept of nature, and are operating in terms of an abstract concept of nature, which is taught to us in school, and in which we are brought up, so much so that we are absolutely hypnotized by it, and we can't experience things which our conceptual system doesn't provide for. When the concept system stops working, because it no longer fits the constantly changing pattern of reality, we're in trouble. Well, that, of course, was the trouble for the Chinese. Their Confucian concept system had very serious limitations. Now, that was the bad reason. There was another reason why they didn't evolve the technology, which was Taoism. The Taoists were really interested in nature. If you read their writings, the Lao Tzu and the Zhuangzi, they are full of natural illustrations. The behavior of water, of insects, of the elements are all used as illustrations of the art of life. Now the Confucians, in contrast to the Taoists, were lexicographers. They believed in what's called the rectification of names. The language, in other words, mustn't get out of hand. There must be very clear and rigid definitions so that we use words the right way. Now, the Taoists had a critique of this. They said, with what words will you define the words? And with what words will you define the words that you use the ones to define with? Obviously, the situation is circular. Every dictionary is really a vicious circle because it's words defined in terms of other words. And they're all the words in the dictionary. So that, say you take a dictionary that has no pictures in it, to someone who doesn't know the language, it's absolutely closed system that you can't penetrate. I once thought as a little boy I was going to write a fundamental book which would contain the necessary fundamentals for knowledge. And the first thing I naturally did there was to write down the alphabet. Then I wanted to write down how it was pronounced. And I saw that I couldn't possibly write down how it was pronounced. I needed to know from the living world how to sound A, B, C, D. And that could never be written down. So I was stuck at the start. I abandoned the project at once. So the Taoists laughed at the Confucians on that account. But also, they felt that nature was organic. It was they saw so vividly that it was a single living organism of immense complexity. And thus, they never thought of it as consisting of separate parts. Just as the head goes with the feet, and the stomach goes with the brain, they arise mutually, together. They are different but not separate. And therefore, they were very cautious about interfering with anything. Furthermore, their theory of politics was quite different from the Confucian. Confucian politics is based on the idea of rulership. There is the emperor. There is the family, which is strictly hierarchical structure of authority from above, which must be followed and obeyed by those below. But the Taoists, when they, the first book, the Tao Te Ching, is a manual of advice to the emperor, among other things. And what it says to the emperor is, don't rule. Because the great Tao flows everywhere, both to the right and to the left. It loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. And when merits are accomplished, it makes no claim to them. Therefore, the emperor is to be retired, to disappear, to be rather more like in our own local government, the sanitary engineer than the mayor. To have a kind of anonymous quality of being underground and of being the one who allows a democracy. Because the Taoist feeling is that you get cooperation from people best by letting them cooperate rather than compelling them. Now, contrast this with a Western theory in which the world is seen not as an organism but as a mechanism. Now, what's the difference? A mechanism has replaceable parts. It is fundamentally an assemblage of parts. An organism isn't. Furthermore, A mechanism has a governor. And an organism apparently governor. It may have a network of governors, all working together in a kind of reticulate pattern. But take, for example, does the brain run the body or does the stomach? Which is the more important? Well, there's two schools of thought, of course. The stomach people say, well, stomachs are really fundamental. They were what was there first. Because an organism, really eating is the important thing. But the brain helps the stomach find food. That's what it's really doing. It evolved in order to develop eyes and ears to sneak around and find out things to swallow. So that's the stomach theory. Then the brain theory is that it's true that the brain is perhaps a later development than the stomach. But that means that the stomach was just the forerunner for the really important character to arrive on the scene. And all the stomach does is it gives fuel to the brain. And the operations of the brain in terms of culture and all that sort of thing are what life is really all about. Now, actually, both theories are right and both are wrong. The arrangement between the head and the stomach is mutual. They arise together. Now, in a system which has a boss, where you've got the mechanism and the chauffeur or the engineer who puts it together and operates it, then you have a government. You have a monarchical world order. And when you have government and things can be viewed as happening in a mechanical order, it changes. I order you to behave differently. Do it this way instead. And how do we do that? Why, we apply mechanical techniques. Chop off heads, or force people to do this, that, and the other. I mean, just separate things up and rearrange them. So then, because in the West we went through the phase of Newtonian mechanics, which arises out of the theory that the physical world is an artifact, that it was made by an architect or a super cosmic engineer and governed from above by law. We thought up the idea of explaining the behavior of things by mechanical causality. And this led to technology, steam engines, to automobiles, to hydraulic systems, everything, electricity. But when we reached a certain point in that development, we started wondering. We started discovering all kinds of processes for which the mechanical analogy was not adequate. It did us well up to a point. But now, in quantum theory and in biology, in these two things in particular, an organic way of looking at things is clearer, is nearer to the way they're operating in the mechanical world. And therefore, the philosophy of Whitehead is probably the greatest organic in the West. Read just like the philosophy of Guangzhou. It's the same view of the world. So that somehow, just at this moment of the development of technology, then we suddenly see it's a lot more complicated than we thought it was. And that our project to change the universe is not going to be as easy as even H.G. Wells imagined. It is just at this moment that this Chinese wisdom becomes available to the West. And we can understand it because it's now talking our language. Talking of the language of relativity. The whole Zhuangzi book starts out with an absolutely marvelous chapter on relativity. Relativity of the opposites. The interdependence, the mutual interpenetration of everything that happens. And we've discovered it. So there is possible then, isn't there, at this point in history, of civilizing technology. Put it that way. You could almost say naturalizing technology. Technology came in as a barbarian, very competent barbarian, all stealing, all glittering with force of arms. And technology is busy transforming the face of the earth into its own image, which is the image of a machine, covering the earth with concrete. But good technologists know that these three ways will be obstacles. Graft will drop and crash. Because we shall take to the air like insects. And all our wires and cables, all that terrible stuff will vanish. Because we should be able to transmit electric power without using it. We shall abandon telephone. Suddenly, as it were, the whole mechanical structure will vanish because it was only a step, what Desjardins called the peduncle. That is, when you got an amoeba separating, it goes apart and there's a thin little...
I don't want to change it too much by doing this one.
Joining them. And then they
the scale
separate.
of the face.
And so there are still two little pear-shaped tops facing each other. And gradually they withdraw and they're balls once again. And well, that little neck and the two projection pieces, those are the peduncles. And the peduncle disappears in the course of evolution, like the umbilical cord of the peduncle. And so all this contraption that we've devised technologically is a peduncle, and it will vanish. Because as we really go about it, we're going to get so that we don't need houses practically. We're going to find ways of, just altering the temperature in the air and living in a glass house or under an invisible plastic dome. And spread it all so that we don't concentrate in cities. Don't have to. You can just sit and you can dial any book in the Library of Congress and read it on a screen in front of you. All sorts of things like that could be done. So that this also, Toynbee in the study of history pointed out, that we will become increasingly independent of tracks, roads, wires, so on, so that the civilization becomes airborne. Maybe it'll even go so far, and here I'm getting into science fiction, as abandoning the electronic method of communication. We may get a telepathic one instead. Who knows? Be a funny world, won't it, when there's no private thoughts? Everybody is completely transparent to everybody else. Sure have to get along. Although, as a matter of fact, this distribution will facilitate privacy, because the thing that really militates against privacy is the citizen. And the control of huge traffics of human beings going about their business, this is a real problem. This is an invasion. So then, this, however, this technical type of development, in order to go along those lines,
Oh my god.
requires that people who are responsible for technical development
Did I go get the hub? No, I didn't. Me and Mom are going out shopping for stream stuff today.
and see the direction.
Yes, I stream at 10 o'clock every day
So
except for
they will
yesterday
not
because of
keep
technical difficulties.
perpetuating
I stopped streaming at 5 o'clock in the morning, so now I do a 10 to 1 stream.
if, for example,
And
the
then
author
we're doing the Star Wars stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays
But it's
evenings.
going to be very
I do
difficult to get
6-hour
into.
streams on the weekends.
People want
I
to go,
do
"Oh,"
writing and comic paneling.
or because machine tools would have to be completely made over. It would be terribly difficult for the industry to change. Therefore,
like
we
it.
get anachronism. I have thought of a sort of fantasy.
I like that, so I will Photoshop that onto that and pass it by Jasmine to
When
see
you
if she
read
likes
about
it.
the beatific vision in the Paradiso,
Yeah, Mom wants to start streaming, but she needs an artboard to draw on at an angle, and then I need a calligraphy nib.
of the
And then I guess we'll go to Walmart and get the hub, because the hub that she has is too low power for her to run
white light,
the
which you can't look at.
the microphone, and she doesn't have enough USB ports either.
And then as it goes out from that,
And if she's good with that, actually I think we did arrange it so she could plug it in. We need lamps, like, because as you can see it's like kind of dark here, and I only have this one lamp, and the hinge on it is kind of jaggedy, so I have it like propped up on my monitor with a fan pointed at it so it doesn't melt the plastic.
suddenly vivid white in a great arc comes around the black, and it does the trick again. And now that's not all it can do. The rays start waving. The whole thing starts shimmering like waves. And then it says, no, that's not all we can do. Then they do curly.
Yeah, like that one doesn't need a rework.
Then they start making angles. All the light starts dancing.
Need this
You
cricket
see,
design.
You could imagine those Buddhist mandalas.
Yeah, need a lamp.
where
Bad.
There are radiances full of myriads of Buddhas, all dancing, all rattling bells and thunderbolts and swords, and the whole thing is going. Then suddenly it goes into another dimension. See, there's more of it, and then it starts getting sound dimensions going with all this color, and smell dimensions going with the sound. And the sound gets so deep and bass and so vibrant that it becomes solid and you can touch it. And the thing gets more and more complicated, and suddenly, before you know where you are, here it is. We're just that thing reached this degree of complexity. See? just like that. But it's never somewhere else. You see, you don't get it anywhere but here. Now, if you try to find it here and say, now, golly, he said this right now.
Oh yeah, and I took a 4-day vacation because I streamed like every day, twice a day for 6 months.
That, and,
so last week,
and
from like Thursday
really
to Monday,
you're pushing it
I
away.
like stream vacation. But now vacation's over, back to business as usual. So I'm up at 5 in the morning still, but I'm just not streaming it.
Because the moment you seek it, you're not looking at the real now, you're looking at one just ahead.
Because I'm just doing studies, and nobody's up that early anyways.
So, in sum, this necessity of relating
this
to
is a collaboration with Jasmine
is
to get some ink and stuff
one
in.
of the cardinal components of a good ecological attitude.
So I don't know if I've told you, but I'm switching it up to inking
because
traditionally instead of trying to do vector, and oh my god, the difference is so much faster to ink. It's so much faster to ink traditionally. I did this in like maybe an hour from setup and all that.
But it is the
Coolio.
greed of the well taken care of.
Like, it didn't even take that long. This would have taken me months to do in Illustrator.
And are still greedy, and therefore go out to exploit this earth.
One of the Logitechs, I handed the other one to Mom.
Which is immediately
it's just like the light situation, like the lighter I can make it over here, the better the resolution gets, but I don't have enough light. I need it lit on both sides. So I need a lamp, and we're gonna go scope out how much a lamp is, I guess. And I'm gonna start using the face cam when I get a haircut. Once Minx can cut my hair for me. So if I can't get it cut by the end of the month, I'm just gonna cut it myself. Start using a face cam and joint. Dang. What's up, Jazz? You got your watch me work to work to work? Chat only, no audio. I did. So you can't hear me? Oh. Am I gonna shave the sides and the back of my hair? No, I'm just gonna get it cut shorter so that I can do it like sitting down, and it doesn't take me 2 hours to wash it. I'm not gonna shave anything. It's gonna be shoulder length. We did say cricket, right? I remember now. Oh, Firefly. KK. Firefly. I don't know why I was thinking cricket. Ugh. Firefly bug. Fireflies look crazy as shit. Okay. They got like bug heads and bug necks and bug bodies. But I guess they have less parts. This light goes back this way. This one goes this way. This one goes this way. This one goes this way. They have stacked antennas.
This concludes Session 3 of Out of Your Mind, Essential Listening from the Alan Watts Audio Archives. Our program continues with Session 4.
Considered as what we pay attention to on the one hand and what we ignore on the other. And I showed how the way in which we pay attention to the world creates, isolates, I'm using that as a noun, isolates that we call particular things, events, and persons. And they seem to be disconnected and to be alone because we ignore the connections between them. And I used the analogy of weaving where the threads go underneath and join on the back in a way that is not seen on the front. So you might say in the unconscious, although I don't particularly like that word, because it makes it seem as if it was something rather dead. But on the unconscious side of life, as on the back of the weaving or the back of the embroidery, there are connections which are not published. Now, in the second part of the theme was the web as mutuality. When I discussed the way the existence of a web, the existence of cloth, or anything like that, depends on a mutual support of the warp and the woof. And this miraculous thing occurs that when the things support each other, being comes into being, cloth comes into being. And so in exactly the same way, our world is a manifestation of relativity. And this requires a balance, a combination, a relationship of opposites in every domain of life. And although these opposites are explicitly different and even antagonistic, they are implicitly one. And that's the secret. See, these two secrets that we went into, the connection between what are supposed to be separate things and events and the mutual unity between what are manifestly, that is to say openly, for purposes of publication, opposites. Now this afternoon I'm going to take two other aspects of the web. The web is a trap, like the spider's web is a trap for flies. Also, the lovely embroideries are worn by women as traps for men from a certain point of view. And I want to consider the web as something playful. You see, there are so many ways of looking at it. And you will find that all these ways are right. But what we need is the fullness of the view. There are people, for example, who can see the web as a trap and get stuck with that. There are people to whom existence is simply hateful. They see it as nothing but a ghastly mistake. The Lord really erred when he created this world, because he arranged it in such a way that everything lives by eating something else. And what I'm doing is I'm describing a certain point of view. You see, I'm not exactly philosophizing.
We have to go on break and then go look
at life in such a way that
other people's streams.
Is this ghastly mistake. For example, there's no such thing as genuine kindness or love. Everybody is really pretending that they are loving other people in order to get some advantage from them. And indeed, there is a point of view which occurs in certain forms of paranoia, where people don't seem to be real. They are mechanisms, and you can think that out quite intensely with a good deal of intelligence. After all, if you start from a good old Darwinian or Freudian basis and see that man is a material machine and that the consciousness of man is simply a very involved and complicated form of chemistry, and that's what it is, you see, well, then this awful mechanical things, these Frankensteins that everybody is, they come around and they say, well, I'm alive. I'm a human being. I have a heart. I love, I hate, I have problems, I feel. And you feel like saying, come off it. You're just a monster. And you put on the civilized act because really you're just a set of teeth on the end of a tube. And you've got a ganglion behind those teeth, which you call your brain or your alleged mind. And this thing is really basically there for two purposes. One, to be cunning enough to get something to eat. put down the tube, and the other, you know what, Mr. Freud's libido. And everything else, you see, can be construed as an elaborate, subtle way of pretending that that's not really what you want to do. But you do. But you put on a great show. Now, some people, according to this view, get mixed up. They so repress that what they really want to do is to eat and to screw, that they get involved in higher things that are the masks for these activities, and think that that's the real purpose of life. And then they become what's called neurotic. And because they get involved in being pure camouflage. So that's what's called escaping from the facts. Not looking at life, not looking at reality correctly. Now, this is a very strange thing, you see, that it is partly true that the universe, so far as its biological aspect is concerned, is this weird system that lives by everybody eating everybody else. Only what we do to maintain what is called order and civilization is that various species make agreements, as it were, that they won't eat each other.
Ah, so much hate there.
They'll cooperate, and so be an enormous gang which can beat down the others. So the human being is the most successful so far of this gangster arrangement. We are the most predatory monsters on Earth, and we have cooperated to assault the fish and the vegetables and the chickens and the cows and everything, see? Only we do it by not letting our left hand know what our right hand doeth. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, unless gentlemen happen to be prone to going hunting as a sport, they don't see their food killed. They don't see the slaughterhouse. And so what you get in the butcher, in the market, the steak, you know, is a thing in its own right. It has nothing to do with a cow. Steak is a thing shaped thus and so, and it looks as if it might be like a banana or something like that, you know, and nobody worries. And when a fish is up, it does indeed look like a fish, but it's not the squiggly, squirmy fish that comes out on the end of the fisherman's line. You know, when you really fish, you realize that the fish doesn't like it very much. Now, there is that absolutely extraordinary side of things that is really terrifying. And so, let me repeat the illustration I used of the cross in the net.
Oops, fucked
Well,
that up already.
one side of it is scissors that cut, and teeth that chew, and get this thing in. And the opening side of it is like James Joyce's in Ulysses, the girl who says yes, and I said yes, yes, yes. She wants to be absolutely ravaged by her man, see. So it's open, open, open. But now comes if we take the dark view of things, the horrible view, excuse me if I go into some rather grisly details, but have you ever heard of a vagina dentata? That is the idea that in the sexual organ of the woman there are teeth. And a lot of men have this fantasy, and so are rendered impotent. They don't make love because they feel that the price of
Byron, I hear ya.
Creative experience, loving
having some issues drawing lady faces.
You're going to get emasculated. You're going to lose your precious member. And this is a very ancient fantasy. It appears throughout all known history. Because this is simply the woman's come on, where she attracts, but she's out really to get you. She is basically a spider mother, who is selfish and doesn't really love you. Not really, but says she does. And, of course, there are, on the other side, all the tricks of the men, which go without mention. So, this is a view of the world as a system of mutual exploitation and of maximal selfishness. Now, it's a very profitable view to explore. Everybody should do in their lifetime sometime two things. One is to consider death, to observe skulls and skeletons, and to wonder what it will be like to go to sleep and never wake up. Never. That is a very gloomy thing for contemplation, but it's like manure. Just as manure fertilizes the plants and so on, so the contemplation of death and the acceptance of death is very highly generative of creative life. You get wonderful things out of that. And the other thing to contemplate is to follow the possibility of the idea that you are totally selfish. That you don't have a good thing to be said for you at all. You are a complete, utter rascal. Now, the Christians have avoided this, because although they say in their Episcopalian form of confession that we have erred and strayed from thy ways like lost sheep, and we have followed too much the devices and desires of our own hearts, too much, we have offended against thy holy laws, we have left undone those things which we ought to have done, and we have done those things which we ought not to have done, and there is no health in us. But it ought to be different. And we're going to do our best to amend with the help of God's grace. And that is a real con act. Because if you equate health with genuine love and perfect unselfishness, then in that sense there is no health in us when we look at ourselves from this point of view. Now, when you go deeply into the nature of selfishness, what do you discover? You say, I love myself, I seek my own advantage. Now, what is the self that I love? What do I want? And that becomes an increasingly ever-deepening puzzle. Now, I've often referred to this when you say to somebody else, I love you. It's always rather disconcerting to the person to whom you say that if you imply that you love them with a pure, disinterested, and holy love. They automatically suspect it as being a little bit phony. But if you say, I love you so much I could eat you, that's an expression, it's a way of saying to a person, you attract me so much that I can't help it. I'm absolutely bowled over by you. I'm gone. And people like that. Then they feel they're really being loved, that it's absolutely genuine. But now, I love you so much I could eat you. Now what the devil do I want? I certainly don't want to eat the girl in the sense of literally devouring her, because then she'd disappear. But I love myself. And what is me? In what way do I know me? When it suddenly occurs to me that I know me only in terms of you. See, when I think of anything that I know and that I like, then it's always something that can be viewed as other than me. I can never get to look at me, real me. It's always behind. It's always hidden. And I really don't know it well enough to know whether I love it or not. Maybe I don't. Maybe it's an appalling mess. But certainly the things I do love and that I want from a selfish point of view, when I really think about them, they're all something else that's in a way outside me. Now, we saw that there is a reciprocity, a total mutual interdependence between what we call the self and what we call the other. That's the warp and the woof. And so, if you are perfectly honest about loving yourself, and you don't pull any punches, you don't pretend that you are anything other than exactly what you are, you suddenly come to discover that the self you love, if you really go into it, is the universe. You don't like all of it. You're selective about it, as we saw in the beginning. Perception is selection. But on the whole, you love yourself in terms of what is other. Because it's only in terms of what is other that you have a self at all. So then, I feel that one of the very great things that C.G. Jung contributed to mankind's understanding was the concept of the shadow. That everybody has a shadow. And that the main task of the psychotherapist is to do what he called to integrate the evil. To, as it were, put the devil in us in its proper function. Because you see, it's always the devil, the unacknowledged one, the outcast, the scapegoat, the bastard, the bad guy, you see, the black sheep of the family. It's always from that point, which we could call the fly in the ointment, you see, that generation comes. In other words, in the same way as in the drama, to have the play, it's necessary to introduce a villain. It's necessary to introduce a certain element of trouble. So, in the whole scheme of life, there has to be the shadow. Because without the shadow, there can't be the substance. So this is why there is a very strange association between crime, all naughty things, and holiness. Holiness is way beyond being good.
Nothing wrong with that. Everybody needs
Good people
vacation
aren't
day, man.
necessarily holy people. A holy person is one who is whole, who has, as it were, reconciled his opposites. And so there's always something slightly scary about holy people. And other people react to them in very strange ways. They can't make up their minds whether they're saints or devils. And so holy people have throughout history always created a great deal of trouble, along with their creative results. Take Jesus, for example. Trouble that Jesus created is absolutely incalculable. Think of the Crusades, the Inquisition, heaven only knows what's gone on in the name of Jesus. Very remarkable. Freud's a big troublemaker, as well as a great healer, you see. It all goes together. So the holy person is scary, because he is like the earthquakes, or better still, he's like the ocean. See, the ocean, on a lovely sunny day, you can say, oh, isn't that gorgeous? And you can go into it and relax and float around.
How do you feel about me
Boy,
playing the
when storm
philosopher?
comes, does that thing get mad? Terrifying.
Channel-wise, I know he says some pretty controversial things,
there is
but
enough.
I mean,
The ocean, you see.
it's very
And Jung
makes me concentrate.
felt that the whole point was to bring the two together, and by a kind of a fantastic honesty, to penetrate one's own motivations to the depths. Jung had a tremendous humor. And he knew that nobody can be completely honest. That you will try and you'll have a great deal of success in exploring your motivations and your dark, unconscious depths. But there will be a certain point at which you will say, well, I've had enough of that. You know? Do you see how, in a strange way, there's a certain sanity in that? When a person indulges in a certain kind of duplicity, of deception, there is something, you all laughed when I said that, there's something humorous about it. And this humor is a very funny thing. Basically, humor is an attitude of laughter about oneself. There is malicious humor, which is laughing at other people. But real deep humor is laughter at oneself. Now, why fundamentally do you laugh about yourself? What makes you laugh about yourself? Isn't it because you know that there is a big difference between what goes on the outside and what goes on the inside?
What are you doing art-wise, Jez?
If I
can pop
hint
open
to
your
see
stream.
that your inside is the opposite of your outside, it makes people laugh. If I don't do it unkindly. If I get up in the attitude of a preacher and say, you're a bunch of miserable sinners and you ought to be different, nobody laughs. But if I say, well, after all, boys will be boys and girls will be girls, and we all know, then people laugh. Now, you see, what's happening when we do that? Now, I passed you around a lot of embroidery to look at before we started. And I'm perfectly sure that you got the point. That there's a big difference between the front and the back. In some forms of embroidery, the back is very different from the front because people take shortcuts. In the front, everything is orderly, and it is supposed to be kind of messy on the back side. See, which side will you wear? You've got to be sure you get the front in the front, have the back in the back. The back has all the little tricks in it, all the shortcuts, all the lowdown that people don't acknowledge, see? And it's exactly the same with the way we live. You know, like sweeping the dust under the carpet in a hurry just before the guests come. I mean, we do ever so many things like that. And if you don't do it, if you don't think you do it, and you think, well, really, my embroidery is the same on both sides, see? Well, you're deceiving yourself. Because what you're doing is you're taking the shortcuts in another dimension, which you're keeping out of consciousness. Everybody takes the shortcuts. Everybody plays tricks. Everybody has in himself an element of duplicity, of deception. Because you see, from this point of view that I'm discussing, where the web is the trap, to be is to deceive. Think of camouflage. The chameleon who changes its color. Think of the butterfly pretending it has eyes. Think of the flower saying to the bee, like my honey? The bee says, wow. But then that means that the bee has to be, and it has to go on living, and all the trouble it takes to go around collecting honey and raising other bees and organizing itself and doing that dance which tells the other bees where there's more honey. There's all that stuff to do. But the flower was deceptive. Now, in the same way I've often said, life is a drama, and a drama is a deception. It's a big act. when you peel an onion and you don't really understand the nature of an onion, you might look for the pit in the center, like any ordinary fruit has. But the onion doesn't have a center. It's all skins. So when you get right down, there's nothing but a bunch of skins. You say, well, that was kind of disappointing. But of course you have to understand that the skins were the part that you eat. Well, in rather the same way, you see, you find when you explore yourself.
I forgot to put in my proportion lines.
Your motivations, and you go through and through, and you try to find out that thing which is really genuine. That's why in Zen discipline, they give you koans which require a perfectly genuine act. An act of total and absolute sincerity. And people knock themselves out trying to do this thing, but they always know that the master's going to catch them. Because he reads their thought. You know that story of von Kleist about the man who had a fight with a bear, and the bear could read his thoughts, so that the only way of hitting the bear was to do so not on purpose. Because the bear would know in advance. So it's the same in working with a Zen master. You have to do the genuine act, not on purpose. But since you're put in a situation where it's rather formal, and you're supposed to do it on purpose, you're stuck, you see. So you explore the onion, and you go in and in and in, and then you find, well, it's all a deception. Now then the question arises, who's deceiving who? Who's fooling who? I'm fooling me? What is fooling? Fooling is playing like you're there when you're not. You know, getting somebody else to answer your name in the roll call. So, we're all, you see, this is the metaphysical basis of it. This is what the Hindus mean by Maya, the world illusion. The world is playing it's there when it isn't. And it's a trap. And it sucks you in. And you can't get out of it. And it's a thorough big trap, too. But always, when you get an idea like this, or a feeling like this, follow it to its extreme. Don't back out from it. If you find you're selfish, go to the extreme of what selfishness means. Confusion largely results from not following.
Hi, Neva. Oh, wait, you can't hear me.
You know, people think they want to be immortal. They'd like to live forever. Do you really want to do that? Think about it. Really go into it, what it would be like. People say they want this, that, and the other. They want this kind of car, they want this kind of dress, or so on, and this much money, and so on. It's always a good idea to think it right through. What it would involve to be in that situation, to have those desires fulfilled. Also, when you form a relationship to another person, think it through too. You see? How inconvenient would they be? However attractive. And always turn the embroidery round and look at the underside, but don't get caught doing it. See, that's something one does on the side in secret, because otherwise you play the game that everything is as it's supposed to be on the front. But that makes you humorous, and that makes you human.
Out of your mind.
That is to say, the game ought to go on. Only the way we play the survival game has a kind of element in it which makes it difficult because we tend to say the first rule of this game is that it's serious. And that messes the whole thing up. So you have to watch out, in other words, when you play, for contradictory game rules, self-contradictory game rules, because if you get mixed up into them, the game ceases to be worth the candle. You start straining at doing something, then it just isn't worth it. Then the second thing that we observed was the web as an analogy of mutual interdependence. We could call it the idea that all existence is relative, that all existence is transactional. The transaction being typically exemplified by, say, the operation of buying and selling, in which there can be no buying without somebody selling, and there can be no selling without somebody else buying. That kind of interdependence, of the inside going together with the outside, what is in you going together with what is outside you, is absolutely fundamental to existence. It is existence. Existence is relativity. Then we explored the web as a trap. The spider's web. Won't you come into my parlor, said the spider to the fly. And we saw what happens if you look at all of life from the point of view that it is original selfishness and original hunger. And we found that if you take that point of view to its ultimate extreme, it dissolves. And it isn't so bad after all. There's a famous comment that R.H. Blythe made on the passage in Macbeth, where Shakespeare says, "It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." And Blythe says, when it's put that way, it doesn't seem so bad after all. I remember that I had a Zen master friend who wrote a letter to a friend of mine, which was passed on to me, saying that the greatest writers, this friend of mine was aspiring to be a writer, and he was trying to write novels that would put across Buddhism to people. You know, sugar the pill. And my Zen master friend didn't approve of this at all. He said, don't write any story to people. Write it to the great sky. Because all the real masters of literature, especially novelists and storytellers, are great masters of nonsense. Think of Lewis Carroll. You can use Lewis Carroll, and he did use Alice in Wonderland as a Zen textbook, because 'twas brillig and the slithy toes did gyre and gimble in the wave. And that's Zen. I had a discussion with a great master in Japan on the last visit there, and we were talking about the various people who are working to translate the Zen books into English. And he said, that's a waste of time. If you really understand Zen, he said, you can use any book. You could use the Bible. You could use Alice in Wonderland. You could use the dictionary. Because, he said, the sound of the rain needs no translation. So what does the rain say? Evening rain. It is the banana leaf that speaks of it first. You see, that's the point. And all the talk in the world doesn't get it unless you listen to the talk in a new way. The sound of the rain needs no translation. So you see, there's something going on. This web may be looked at as patterns. And the world is basically patterning. What else do you do when you come to think of it? When you eat, you are turning food into the pattern of your skeleton, your muscles, and your nervous system. That's the pattern. And you see basically, hooray for that pattern. That's great, it's terribly interesting. But then you want other patterns. You like to look through a microscope and see the patterns that exist in the small world. You like to look through a kaleidoscope or a teleidoscope and see the patterns. You like to have paintings around and see the patterns. You like to watch the water play. You want to watch the birds go and the clouds and all that. Fascinating patterns. And that really does, doesn't it, seem to be the point. I mean, what do you do when you're very rich and you want to take some rascal of ancient times who became very rich by all sorts of skullduggery and warfare and so on? He got himself a suit of armor, a beautiful sword. And he had the armorer make the most intricate patterns, arabesques, of inlaid gold on the steel. Why? Because it's, as they say among the Pennsylvania Dutch, it's for nice. It's a great thing to have all that jazz. And that's what we go for. What do people do most of the time what would they like to do, really? What's their idea of heaven? When people are unoccupied, as far as I can make out, they get together and they sing and dance. Or else watch somebody else do it. Nowadays we live in a non-participative culture and we don't do very much singing and dancing. We are lugubrious. But we watch other people do it on television. What we really are interested in is to be able to spend all the time going, you know, something like this. And that's what our heart's doing, that's what our lungs are doing, it's what our eyeballs are doing, and it's what all these fantastic capillaries of the veins are doing. They're going just doo-doo-boo-doo, see? And that's the point. Now the thing is, ought this to be allowed? You know, dare we admit it? Because we've been brought up, you see, in a cultural context in which the universe is presided over by somebody serious. And it's only very, very occasional obscure references in the Jewish and Christian scriptures to the idea that God dances. Of course, in Hindus they know Shiva dances, and all the gods dance, and they're represented in the dance. But in our way of looking at things, no. Back, deep down in, there is something that you must respect with a very, very, you mustn't laugh in church. Especially if you got in front of the throne of heaven. Everybody would be dead silent. Wow, you see, I mean, that's really serious. Here is the Father Almighty, world without end. And you watch out. Don't you laugh. Why not? Because Father Almighty, world without end is a very insecure fellow. And if anybody laughed, he might feel uneasy, you know, that there was something wrong going on. That someone challenged his power. So he is a funny fellow, you see, as we mythologize ultimate reality in the form of this cosmic grandpapa, who is also a king and is demanding above all things reverence and respect. So it's difficult for us, because of that cultural heritage,
Exactly. I need to say.
to accept, to accommodate our common sense to the idea that the web might basically be playful. That it might be like somebody saying, won't you come and play with me? A child. And the other child has some little hesitation. I don't know whether I ought to play with you. You come from the wrong side of the tracks. Or, I don't feel like playing today. I feel serious. I don't think play is important. We ought to do something real, like wash the dishes for mother, who, incidentally, has forgotten that the whole point of washing the dishes is playful. You know, you don't wash the dishes for a serious reason. you like the table to look nice, you know. You don't want to serve up the dishes for dinner with all the leavings of breakfast still lying on them. So why do you want the table to look nice? Well, again, it's for nice, you see. You like the pattern of it that way. People get terribly compulsive about doing these things. And they think that going on arranging the patterns of life is something that's a duty. That means a debt. That you owe it to yourself or to your family or to someone or other. You're in debt. See, that's the trouble. When a child comes into the world, the parents play an awful game on it. Instead of being honest, they say, we've made such great sacrifices for you. Here we are, we've supported you, we've paid for your education, and you're an ungrateful little bastard. And the child feels terribly guilty because what we do is we build into every human being the idea that existence is guilt. The existentialists make a big thing of this, and you watch out for them because they're hopeless. And they say that guilt is ontological. If you're not feeling guilty, you're not human. And that was because Papa and Mama said, look at all the trouble you've caused us. You shouldn't dare to exist. You have no rights. But maybe we'll give you some out of the generosity of our hearts so that you'll be permanently indebted to us. And so everybody goes around with that sort of thing in their background unless they have different kinds of papas and mamas who didn't play that trick on them. But so many papas and mamas do that. And if they don't do it, somebody else does it. Auntie comes around and says, you don't realize what your father and mother have done to you. You think, you know, you can just stay around here and goof off. But they've sweated blood to give you your clothes and food and so on, and you ought to be grateful for it. But that's not the way to make people grateful. They won't be grateful that way. They'll imitate gratefulness. They'll go and put on a big show and say, oh, thank you so much, I feel so indebted to you, and so on and so forth, and they'll make it look good. But it isn't real. Because, actually, one's father and mother had a great deal of fun bringing you into being, or we hope they did. And they wanted to do that the worst way. They have no reason to complain about all these things and try and make the children feel guilty. But you see, it is an amazing thing in our culture that everybody is afflicted with ontological guilt. For example, if a policeman comes to the door, everybody is instantly frightened. You wonder, what on earth have I done? And there are certain clergy who are absolute experts in making you feel guilty. They're really marvelous. And there are clergy of all kinds, for all classes, and for all levels of intelligence. They can make you feel real guilty. Only you have to watch always what games people are playing. Now you see, the thing is that really is a puzzle, is that they don't admit they're playing games. And when a person is playing games and doesn't admit that they're playing games, then you have some kind of a trickster who isn't really being fair to you. Now, of course, the game, that this game is not a game, has a certain kind of a fascinating quality to it. How mixed up can we all get? Let's try. See? There's a certain possibility in that. I would like to go insane and be as insane as anybody has ever been and be the farthest out crazy nut in the world. See, that's a game. But it's not a good game. It's a game being played by a person who didn't really understand that everyday life was a game too. And I think the most important thing is to admit this. All really humane people admit that they're rascals. That's, you see, on the side of the not respectable, the selfish. But so also, all humane people should admit that they're jokers, that they're playing games and playing tricks, that I am doing it on you. I am most ready to admit this. I hoaxed you all into coming here to tell you what? This was a trap, you see, but I'm going to make it an entertaining trap so that you won't feel so badly about it. Now, this is philosophy, but I think philosophy is like music. You go to a concert and you listen to somebody play Bach or Mozart or Beethoven. And what's all that about? You know, it isn't about anything except dee 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 dee. You know, that's what it's about. And so, in the same way, as I conceive my work as a philosopher, I'm simply pointing out that existence is the same kind of a thing as a Bach invention. It's going this way and that way, and hills and waters going all out there, and the fish are going around in it, and breeding, and the ducks are doing this, that, and the other. And that's the same thing as dee 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 dee. See? So, if you can admit that that's what it's all about, you have a little problem. Because there's not only the threat that it really might be serious and that you shouldn't be laughing about this, but there's also a kind of opposite. Then are you saying it's merely just fiddling around? See? I mean, you're saying it's only a game? Is that all there is to it? Well, now, what do you think? You see, this again is a question that everybody has to think things through. What did you want? Didn't you want a game? Did you want it to be serious in the end? Think about the question. What kind of a thing would you like God to be? What would you like to do for eternity? Really? Here is Jan van Eyck, who paints the eschatological picture of the Last Judgment. What a strange man he must have been. For here is heaven above and hell below. And in heaven, here's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Ghost, all there together, and the Virgin Mary, and the apostles, and they're all sitting in committee. And they have an aisle, you know, just like in church, and there they are facing each other, and they're all sitting there very solemnly. Now, I don't know what it's about. But below, right at the end of the aisle, you see, where all these apostles are sitting, is St. Michael. A rather gorgeous figure in beautiful armor with wings. And underneath him is a bat-winged skull. And beneath those bat wings, though, all horror is let loose. Michael is about to slash that skull, see, with his sword. But below, there are nude bodies, some of them pretty comely. And they're all squirming in there, and they're being eaten by worms. And they're eating the worms. And there's a kind of a mush. It's like the sort of situation you find when you turn up a big rock and there's all that going on underneath. Now, there's no question whatever that Van Eyck, the painter, had more fun painting that part of the picture than he did painting the top part. So in the same way it was with Hieronymus Bosch and with Bruegel They painted every kind of weird, surrealistic deviltry going on, and they really loved it, but they couldn't admit it. Now, the only time when the holy people had a ball was when, for example, the Islamic artists made arabesques, and the Celtic artists made fantastically intricate lattices to decorate the margins of their Gospels and missals. They are unbelievably beautiful, or take stained glass or something like that, but what are they doing? What's it all about? So well, you ask the question, then what will you do in heaven? And the thing you want to do, of course, is to get mixed up in this little, see, it's like the musician. He likes to take a melody, and he likes to put another melody that fits in with it, and another one that fits in with both, and then a fourth one, and arrange them together, and he invents an instrument like an organ that he plays with two hands. Then he adds foot pedals so that he can play with his 2 feet. And he get this hand doing one rhythm, this doing another, this doing another, and this doing another. See, that makes it complicated. And so when drummers get together and play, somebody starts out with a certain rhythm, and then that rhythm has holes in it. In other words, it has certain silences, and the next drummer fills those silences in an interesting way. He counts and picks out a pattern. And what do you imagine DNA is? The basic form of biological existence. Now, DNA is like a necklace, like Charlotte's wearing, with different kinds of beads in it. And according to the order and the way those beads are arranged, so you get genes, and so you get the particular form of life that emerges from those genes. So what we're doing, basic down, way down, is saying, she loves me, she don't, she'll have me, she won't, she would if she could, but she can't, you see? Or, Tinker Tailor Solar Savior, rich man, poor man, beggar and thief. Well, this is the way life is going on. And as a result comes all this, you see? Question is then, you see, in your heart of hearts, you can take the attitude that all this is terrible, or that it's dreadfully serious. You see, you can play comedies, you can play tragedies, farces, histories and romances and all that kind of thing, and you can take these various attitudes to it. But if you are awakened, and as it were, you've been let into the secret, which is what we've been talking about, see? Because the web is also the curtain, you know, the veil. Veil which hides the face of God from the angels, you see. There's always this veil. That's why we like a striptease. Because there's an implication of this. You should never give the show completely away. There always should be a little bit of a veil left, you see. There always is. Because even if you find the striptease artist gets completely naked, there's really something hidden. What's the motivation? What sort of a person is she? Would I really like to embrace her? Or would she have bad breath? You know? Or something. And you never really know. You never really get to the bottom. That's why everybody, all men poets, say that women are basically mysterious. And they ought to be. So are men basically mysterious, from women's point of view. Although they play that they're not. See, this is the way it goes. Men are supposed to be very open. And they say, well, at a certain situation, this is the way it is. After all, it's perfectly rational. This is a matter of practical affairs. And women say, well, they say, I'm not quite as articulate as you are, but I know there's something you've left out, but I can't explain it. And by this means, everything is kept going. So, what I'm saying is, I think this. I'm trying to share with you a certain style of life and an attitude to life and an insight. Well, I've taken you on one side and said, listen, kids, things aren't what they seem. Don't be fooled. There's a big deception going on, and you're involved in it, but I just thought you ought to know it. And enjoy it, see? I'm terribly puzzled about the way people go out of their way to disenjoy themselves. They take so much trouble about it. Did you ever read H.L. Mencken's essay called A Libido for the Ugly? And it describes a Pennsylvania mining town, which isn't exactly totally impoverished. I mean, they can build things and they have enough money to do this, that, and the other. But he describes how they made a church out of yellow stone that's so awful that it looks like a Presbyterian with a grin. And all around you have only to look and you see this perfect passion for making the world look grisly. And it isn't only job builders and garage owners who do this kind of thing, it's also people who profess to be painters. They're actually using excrements for painting in Paris today, on the theory that the world is shot to pieces, and that since the artist is a representative of his times, he ought to show the times as they really are, as a social critic. And so he makes the most weird, I mean, he paints Campbell's soup can, and then he makes music that shrieks and screams in the most, he just goes out of his way to make it sound as ugly as he possibly can manage. And the ingenuity is about that is endless. Because that is the times. This is a critic, you see. Instead of being somebody who reveals. Now you see, let's take you the sort of the character of the Pied Piper. The person who brings you an invitation to dance. I would say then, you see, there is going to be a dance this evening, and I would like you all to come, you know. That's the spirit in which I invite you to a seminar. I'm not inviting you in the spirit of saying, no, we're going to have to discuss some very grave matters, and you ought to be awake to all these things and arouse your social conscience, and so on and so forth. Because when you get through with all that, then what? When you get through with feeding the hungry and clothing the naked, and we are making great strides with automation and technology in abolishing poverty totally, then what are we going to do? Well, you see, if you've got all these people clothed and fed and so on, and then they say, well, now what next? If you've got a kind of Quakerish state of mind, you don't know what to do. Well, feed and clothe somebody else. See? Get busy. But then, where is that leading? So you see, to spread joy, you have to have it. To impart delight, you have to be more or less delightful. And to be delightful is not some factor of trying to make yourself look delightful. It is to do things that are delightful to you. You become thereby delightful to others. That's to say, people who are interesting are people who are interested. Any person, for example, who is constantly thinking about all sorts of other things and other people and so on, because they're fascinating, becomes a fascinating person. But a person who doesn't think about anybody else, and who's got very little going on inside their skull, is boring. So, in other words, your engagement with the external world the more you are involved, the more your personality is enriched. But if you try to enrich your personality by taking a course in how to win friends and influence people, or how to be a real person, you'll become just a washout. Because you will be in a kind of small circle. You'll be, as it were, you'll be like somebody trying to get a good nutrition by biting his nails. And then the fingers next. You know, and then half an arm gone and so on. And you're entirely nourishing yourself with yourself. Now, of course, on a vast scale, the universe does that. It eats itself up. That's why the symbol of the snake swallowing its tail is a very fundamental, archaic symbol of life. But the way it's done is that the snake has in some part of the ring a place where it's not sensitive. It's called the unconscious. Where it doesn't know that what comes to it in the form of food is actually what left it in the form of excrement. That thing is, don't mention it. After all, as the Lord said at the beginning of the universe, you must draw the line somewhere. And so, as a result of there always being a kind of gap, that's the gap, you know, like where the electric spark jumps. That's the thing behind your head, behind your eyes, that you could never get to look at. It's the gap. And because of that little gap, the circle doesn't just revolve in a dull way, just go round and round and round like a boring thing. It has rhythm. See, if I say, yoy, no rhythm. See, it's just one long sound. After a while we say, oh, cut it off. Or we just become insensitive to it. But what we want to hear is the break in it, you see. And we want to hear it go on, off, and vanish, and come back again, and so on. And it sets up a rhythm. That becomes interesting. That's putting gaps between, see? You need those gaps. So now you see it, now you don't. Now you see it, now you don't. Oh, that's pretty dull. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to have you see it 3 times, and then with a regular not see it between them. Then there's going to be a longer not see it after that one. And then I'm going to do something very complicated after that so that you don't really know when it's going to come next. So there's going to be a surprise. You know how we all do that? And interesting people are those who do this in very involved ways. Dull people, sort of people who put their hats on absolutely straight, are the kind of people, for example, who have the same meal every day, exactly the same thing, always. See? They have no inventiveness. They have the same routine, they go to the same office, they answer the same kind of letters, and that's that. See? But then, if they want to start up a more interesting kind of business and make more money, then they have to figure out, take the people who make clothes. They figure out fashion. It's going to be a new thing for ladies, a new style this fall. We're going to make them do long skirts instead of the short skirts, middle skirts. And the skirts go like this. Then finally they thought about having topless women. They're going to play around with that and have an absolutely scandalous fall. But that's the whole thing, you see. It's this thing of rhythm. And yes, you ask, well, I see that. What is doing this rhythm? Who, after all, am I? And as you explore deeper and deeper and deeper into the nature of yourself, you find that you're a rhythm doing a rhythm. And behind that there's another rhythm doing a rhythm. Your vibrations. And once again you meet our friend the onion. And who is doing all this? Why, he disappeared. Came around, and there it was, and we were looking for him, and he vanished. And then just when we weren't looking for him again, there he is. But every time we try to see, he isn't there. Now, do you see that? That situation is what's called life.